The dust from the departing stagecoach had barely settled when Daisy Porter realized she had made the most terrifying decision of her life. She walked backward along the dirt road leading out of Sheridan, Wyoming, her eyes fixed on the shrinking silhouettes of the buildings that had been her prison and sanctuary for the past 3 years. Each step carried her further from everything familiar, yet she couldn't bear to turn around and face the unknown that awaited her. Most folks find it easier to see where they're going rather than where they've been, Miss Porter. A deep voice drawled from beside her. Daisy startled, nearly losing her footing on the uneven ground. A tall cowboy atop a chestnut stallion had fallen into pace beside her, facing forward where she could not bring herself to look. The late afternoon sun of June 1878 cast long shadows across his features, but even in profile, she could see he was handsome in a rugged, weather-beaten way. "I'm perfectly aware of what lies behind me, sir," Daisy replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's the uncertainty ahead that I find challenging." The cowboy chuckled, adjusting his worn leather hat. "Name's Blake Remington, madam, and if you don't mind my saying, walking backward for the 15 miles to the next town might prove more than challenging." Daisy's steps faltered, though she maintained her backward gait. 15 miles. She'd hoped the next settlement would be closer. The meager coins in her reticule wouldn't buy her passage on another coach, and her provisions would barely last 2 days. 15 miles of rough country, Blake confirmed, his eyes scanning the horizon. Coyotes get mighty curious after dark, not to mention the occasional bandit who might find a lone woman an appealing target. Daisy's throat tightened. She hadn't thought this through, not entirely. When she'd fled Madame Lorraine's boarding house before dawn, taking only what she could carry, her sole thought had been escape. Now, as the afternoon waned and Sheridan grew smaller in the distance, the foolishness of her impulsive departure weighed heavily upon her. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Remington, but Blake," he corrected. "Just Blake. Blake," she repeated, the name foreign on her tongue. "I've survived worse than wilderness and bandits." His eyes, the color of a summer storm, assessed her carefully. "No doubt you have, Miss Porter. But that don't mean you need to face such trials unnecessarily." He extended a gloved hand. "My ranch is 5 miles east. I can offer you a safe place to rest, a decent meal, and tomorrow I'll take you wherever you're heading." Daisy finally stopped walking and turned to face him fully, suspicion evident in her posture. "And what would you expect in return for such generosity, sir?" Blake's expression hardened slightly. "Nothing but common courtesy, madam. I was raised to help those in need." "If that offends you, then by all means, continue your backward journey." She studied him, searching for any sign of deceit. At 23, Daisy had learned the hard way that men rarely offered assistance without expecting something in return. But there was something in Blake Remington's forthright gaze that disarmed her practiced cynicism. "You don't even know me," she said softly. "I know you're running from something," he replied. "And I know that whatever it is, facing forward might serve you better than watching it fade behind you." Daisy inhaled deeply, the scent of sage and sun-baked earth filling her lungs. Sheridan was already a smudge on the horizon. She had severed all ties there, some more violently than others. Perhaps this cowboy was right. Perhaps it was time to face forward. "Very well, Mr. Remington Blake. I accept your offer." Blake nodded, satisfaction briefly crossing his features before he dismounted in one fluid motion. "You can call me Blake," he said, leading the horse closer. "And I'll need to know what to call you besides Miss Porter." "Daisy," she replied, accepting his assistance as he helped her onto the saddle. "My name is Daisy." He swung up behind her, his chest a solid presence against her back. "Well, Daisy Porter, hold tight. Maverick here sets a brisk pace." As they rode eastward, Daisy forced herself not to look back at the town diminishing behind them. The warmth of the man at her back was both comforting and disconcerting. She couldn't remember the last time someone had offered her help without an ulterior motive. Yet here she was, trusting her safety to a stranger whose face she'd barely glimpsed. "May I ask what brings you to these parts?" Daisy ventured after several minutes of silence broken only by the rhythmic hoofbeats. "Born here," Blake replied. "Left for a spell during the war, came back to find my father's ranch in disrepair. Been rebuilding it since '65. You fought in the war?" she asked, surprised by his forthright manner. "Union cavalry. Spent most of my time in Tennessee and Georgia. Saw things no man should see." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Daisy sensed the weight behind his words. "I lost my brother at Gettysburg," she offered, unsure why she was sharing such personal information with a stranger. Blake's arm briefly tightened around her waist, a gesture of sympathy rather than familiarity. "Sorry to hear that. War's a terrible thing. Takes the best of us and leaves the rest wondering why we were spared." They rode in contemplative silence as the landscape changed from flat prairie to gently rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen. The sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. "There it is," Blake announced, pointing to a cluster of buildings nestled in a verdant valley. "Remington Ranch. Not much compared to some spreads, but it's mine." Daisy's breath caught. The ranch house was a substantial two-story structure with a wide front porch. Several outbuildings and corrals surrounded it, and in the distance, she could see cattle grazing peacefully. It wasn't grand, but it spoke of hard work and prosperity. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. Blake made a non-committal sound, but she felt him straighten with pride. As they approached, a weathered man emerged from the barn, waving. "That's Hank," Blake explained. "Been with my family since I was a boy. Runs things when I'm away." Hank greeted them as Blake helped Daisy dismount. His eyes were curious but not judgmental as Blake made introductions. "Miss Porter needs a place to stay tonight, Hank. She's traveling east." "We've got plenty of room, miss," Hank said, tipping his hat. "Martha will be pleased to have another woman around, even if just for a night." "Martha?" Daisy inquired. "Hank's wife," Blake explained. "She keeps house for us, makes the best apple pie this side of the Mississippi." Hank chuckled. "That she does. She'll have supper ready soon. I'll take care of Maverick, boss. You get Miss Porter settled." Blake led Daisy to the house, his hand hovering near the small of her back without actually touching her. The gesture was protective rather than possessive, and Daisy found herself appreciating his consideration. The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly refined. Polished wood floors, comfortable furniture, and tasteful decorations spoke of a woman's touch. "My mother's influence," Blake said, noting her surprise. "She believed that just because we lived on the frontier didn't mean we had to live like savages." "She sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Blake replied, a hint of old grief coloring his tone. "Yellow fever took her and my sister in '67. Before Daisy could respond, a plump, middle-aged woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands emerged from the kitchen. "Blake Remington, you bring home a guest and don't even send word ahead." Despite her scolding tone, the woman was smiling. "I'd have put on something more presentable." "Martha, this is Miss Daisy Porter," Blake said. "She's in need of lodging for the night." "Daisy, this is Martha, the true ruler of Remington Ranch." Martha wiped her hands on her apron and approached Daisy with a warm smile. "Welcome, Miss Porter. Any friend of Blake's is welcome here." "Thank you, though I'm afraid Mr. Remington and I only just met," Daisy admitted. "He found me on the road from Sheridan and kindly offered assistance." Something knowing passed through Martha's eyes. Many women fled Sheridan for various reasons, and Madame Lorraine's establishment was infamous throughout the territory. "Well, you look done in, poor thing. Come with me, and I'll show you where you can freshen up before supper. I've got a stew that'll put the roses back in your cheeks." Martha led Daisy to a small but comfortable bedroom on the second floor. A pitcher of water and a basin sat on a washstand, and clean towels were neatly folded beside it. "This was Blake's sister's room," Martha explained softly. "I keep it ready for guests, though we don't get many." "It's lovely," Daisy said, genuinely touched by the hospitality. "I don't know how to thank you all for your kindness." Martha patted her arm. "No need for thanks. Blake has a knack for finding strays, both the four-legged and two-legged kind. He's got a good heart, that one, even if he tries to hide it behind that gruff exterior." Left alone, Daisy sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the day catching up with her. When she'd slipped out of Sheridan before dawn, she'd had no destination in mind, only the desperate need to escape. Now, as the sun set on her first day of freedom, she found herself in the home of a stranger who'd shown her more kindness in a few hours than she'd experienced in years. She washed her face and hands, unpinned and rebraided her chestnut hair, and changed into the one spare dress. She'd brought a simple blue cotton that had seen better days but was at least clean. Then, gathering her courage, she descended to join her hosts for supper. The meal was simple but delicious: venison stew, fresh bread, and garden vegetables. Hank regaled them with stories of local happenings while Martha kept everyone's plates full. Blake said little, but Daisy often caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "So, Miss Porter," Hank said as they enjoyed coffee and Martha's promised apple pie, "where are you headed?" Daisy hesitated. She had no specific destination, only a way. "I have relatives in Denver," she improvised. "I thought I might stay with them for a while." Blake's eyebrow rose slightly, but he didn't contradict her obvious lie. "Denver's a fair journey from here. Stage runs twice weekly from Clearwater. I can take you there tomorrow if that suits." "That's very kind," Daisy replied, hating how her deception snowballed. "Though I wouldn't want to impose further." "No imposition," Blake said firmly. "I have business in Clearwater anyway." After supper, Daisy offered to help Martha with the dishes, but the older woman shooed her away. "You and Blake go sit on the porch a while. Night's too pretty to spend in the kitchen." The evening air was cool and fragrant with pine and sage. Daisy settled into a rocking chair, while Blake leaned against the porch railing, rolling a cigarette with practiced ease. "You don't have relatives in Denver," he stated after lighting his cigarette, the match briefly illuminating his features in the growing darkness. Daisy stiffened. "I don't see how that's any of your concern." "It's not," he agreed. "But if you're planning to board a stage tomorrow, it helps to know where you're actually going." She sighed, gazing at the stars emerging in the deepening twilight. "I don't know where I'm going," she admitted softly. "I just know I couldn't stay in Sheridan any longer." Blake nodded as if her answer confirmed something. "Madame Lorraine's is a hard place to leave. She doesn't like losing her investments." Daisy's head snapped up, her eyes widening in alarm. "How did you small territory?" he said. "Word gets around. Are you going to take me back?" Her voice was barely audible, fear tightening her throat. Blake's expression hardened. "I'm not in the business of returning people to situations they've risked everything to escape, Miss Porter." Relief washed over her, followed quickly by shame. "I wasn't always." "I mean, I didn't choose that life," she said, needing him to understand. "Few do," he replied simply. "My parents died of cholera when I was 17, Daisy found herself explaining. "My brother Daniel was all I had left, and when he died at Gettysburg, I had nowhere to go. I took a position as a seamstress in Baltimore, but the pay wasn't enough to live on. When a man offered me work out west, promising good wages in a respectable hotel, she trailed off. And by the time you realized what kind of hotel it was, you were too far from home with no money to leave. Blake finished for her. Daisy nodded, unable to meet his eyes. 3 years, she whispered. 3 years of my life in that place. Until yesterday, when a new girl arrived couldn't have been more than 15. Something broke in me then. I knew I had to leave, even if it meant walking backward all the way to the ends of the earth. Blake was silent for a long moment. "What happened before you left?" he finally asked. "Lorraine wouldn't let you go without a fight." Daisy's hands trembled in her lap. "Her right-hand man, Curtis, caught me packing. He tried to. I fought back. There was a letter opener on the table. I didn't mean to," she broke off, horrified at what she'd revealed. "Is he dead?" Blake's voice was carefully neutral. "I don't know," she whispered. "There was so much blood. I ran. Just grabbed my bag and ran until I reached the edge of town. Hid in an abandoned barn until dawn, then started walking. That's when you found me." Blake took a long drag from his cigarette, considering. "Curtis McGrath is a mean drunk and a bully. If he's dead, he won't be missed. If he's alive, he'll be looking for revenge." "I should leave at first light," Daisy said, rising abruptly. "I've brought danger to your door." "I'm sorry, I should never have accepted your help." Blake caught her wrist as she turned to go inside, his touch gentle but firm. "Sit down, Daisy. No one knows you're here. And even if they did, McGrath would think twice before coming to my property. We have history." "What kind of history?" she asked, reluctantly returning to her seat. A grim smile touched Blake's lips. "The kind that left him with a broken jaw and 3 fewer teeth. He tried to rough up one of my ranch hands in town last year. I take care of my people." "And I'm not one of your people," Daisy pointed out. Blake studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You are tonight," he finally said. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's soon enough to decide what comes next." Daisy slept fitfully that night, haunted by dreams of Curtis McGrath's blood-covered face and Madame Lorraine's vindictive rage. She woke before dawn, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. As reality returned, she considered fleeing before the household stirred, sparing them any potential consequences of harboring her. But the thought of facing the wilderness alone with no clear destination kept her rooted in place. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs, surprised to find Blake already at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee. He looked up as she entered, his expression softer than it had been the previous evening. "You're up early," he observed. "I could say the same of you," she replied, accepting the cup of coffee he poured for her. "Ranch work starts at dawn," he said with a shrug. "Old habits." They sat in surprisingly comfortable silence as the house gradually brightened with the rising sun. Martha appeared shortly after, her cheerful morning greeting dispelling the intimate atmosphere. Breakfast was a hearty affair of flapjacks, bacon, and eggs. Hank joined them, bringing news that one of the mares had foaled during the night. The normalcy of the scene, the easy conversation, the simple pleasure of good food and company made Daisy's heart ache for all she'd missed these past years. "I need to check on that foal before we head to Clearwater," Blake told her as they finished eating. "Would you like to come along? It's quite a sight new life finding its legs." Daisy hesitated. Her experience with horses was limited to watching them from Madame Lorraine's window. "I'd like that," she said, surprising herself. The morning air was crisp and sweet as they walked to the stable. Blake moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his surroundings, occasionally pointing out features of the ranch. He was clearly proud of what he'd built, and Daisy found herself seeing him in a new light, not just as a rescuer, but as a man with dreams and accomplishments of his own. The new foal was indeed a marvel, all gangly legs and curious eyes as it nestled against its mother. Daisy stayed at a respectful distance, but her delight was evident. "She's beautiful," she breathed as the foal wobbled to its feet. "She is," Blake agreed, his gaze shifting from the horses to Daisy's face. Something in his expression made her flush. "What will you name her?" she asked, looking away. Blake considered. "How about Daisy?" She glanced back at him, startled. "After me, why? Seems fitting," he replied. "Found you both on the same day, both of you facing new beginnings." The simple sentiment touched Daisy deeply. Before she could respond, Hank appeared at the stable door. "Rider coming in fast from the direction of Sheridan," he announced, his expression grim. Blake's demeanor changed instantly. "Get Miss Porter back to the house," he instructed Hank. "Keep her out of sight." Fear clutched at Daisy's heart as Hank led her swiftly toward the main house. From the porch, she watched Blake stride toward the approaching rider, his posture alert but outwardly calm. The rider, a young man Daisy didn't recognize, reined in his lathered horse. Words were exchanged, though Daisy couldn't make them out. Blake's stance grew more rigid with each passing moment. After what seemed an eternity, the rider departed and Blake returned to the house, his expression grave. "What is it?" Daisy asked, her voice barely audible. "Curtis McGrath is alive," Blake said without preamble, "and he's out for blood. Told the sheriff you robbed and tried to kill him. There's a reward for your capture, dead or alive." Daisy sank onto a porch chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "I have to leave," she whispered. "Now," Blake shook his head. "That's exactly what they expect. The roads will be watched." He paced the length of the porch, thinking. "We need to let things cool down. Give me time to find out exactly what's happening in town." "I can't stay here," Daisy protested. "I've already put you all at risk." "You're safer here than anywhere else right now," Blake insisted. "My property extends for miles. Even if they come looking, we'll have plenty of warning." "Why would you do this?" Daisy asked, searching his face. "You barely know me." Blake's eyes met hers, intense and unwavering. "Because I know men like Curtis McGrath. I know women get blamed for men's crimes. And I know what it's like to need someone to stand between you and those who do you harm." Something unspoken passed between them in that moment, a connection deeper than their brief acquaintance could explain. Martha appeared in the doorway, her normally cheerful face creased with concern. "I've prepared the old line shack for Miss Porter," she announced. "It's stocked with provisions and hidden enough that even most of the ranch hands don't know it's there." Blake nodded approvingly. "Good thinking, Martha. Hank will take you there, Daisy." "I need to ride into Sheridan, find out exactly what we're dealing with." "No," Daisy exclaimed, alarmed. "If you go into town, they'll suspect you're involved." "I go into Sheridan regularly," Blake countered. "Nothing unusual about it. Besides, no one saw you with me yesterday. As far as anyone knows, you could be halfway to Cheyenne by now." Daisy wanted to argue further, but the determined set of Blake's jaw told her it would be futile. Instead, she reached for his hand, surprising them both. "Please be careful," she said softly. "I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me." Blake's fingers tightened around hers briefly. "I'm always careful, Miss Porter," he said, his voice gentler than she'd yet heard it. "Now go with Hank. I'll be back by nightfall." The line shack was more comfortable than Daisy had expected, a small but sturdy cabin tucked into a stand of pines on a ridge overlooking the ranch. A stream gurgled nearby, and the view stretched for miles, offering both beauty and the ability to spot approaching riders. "Blake's grandfather built this place when he first settled the land," Hank explained as he showed her the cabin's features. "Used it as a base while he was building the main house. These days it mainly serves as shelter during roundups or when the men are working this section of the ranch. It's lovely, Daisy said, genuinely impressed by the neat interior. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a narrow bed occupied another, and a small table with 2 chairs sat beneath a window overlooking the valley. Martha keeps it stocked with essentials, Hank continued, indicating a cupboard filled with canned goods and dry staples. There's a root cellar out back with potatoes and apples, springs just over that ridge, good, clean water. After ensuring Daisy was settled, Hank departed, promising to check on her the following day. Left alone, Daisy explored her temporary refuge more thoroughly. Someone Martha most likely had left fresh linens on the bed and a stack of books on the small table. The thoughtful gesture brought tears to Daisy's eyes. As the day waned, Daisy's anxiety grew. What was happening in Sheridan? Had Blake learned anything useful? Was he safe? The questions chased each other through her mind as she prepared a simple supper from the provisions Martha had provided. Night fell, and still no word. Daisy stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching the distant lights of the main ranch house, wondering if Blake had returned. Sleep eluded her as she imagined a dozen scenarios, each worse than the last. Dawn broke, painting the eastern sky in delicate pinks and golds. Daisy, who had finally dozed in the pre-dawn hours, woke to the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Fear and hope warred within her as she peered cautiously through the window. Blake Remington, looking weary but unharmed, dismounted from his horse. Relief flooded Daisy's system and she rushed outside to meet him. "You're all right," she breathed, resisting the urge to throw her arms around him. "I told you I would be," he replied, his voice rough with fatigue. "May I come in? It's been a long night." Daisy stepped aside, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance and the intimacy of welcoming a man into what was essentially her bedroom. Blake seemed oblivious to her discomfort as he sank into one of the chairs at the table. "Coffee," she offered, gesturing to the pot keeping warm on the small wood stove. "Please," he said gratefully. As she poured, Daisy studied him surreptitiously. His face was drawn with exhaustion and a day's growth of beard shadowed his jaw. Yet there was something compelling about him in this unguarded state, something that stirred feelings she'd thought long dead. "What did you learn?" she asked, placing a steaming cup before him. Blake took a long sip before answering. "McGrath's alive, but barely. Doctor says you missed anything vital, but he lost a lot of blood. He's claiming you tried to rob him and then stabbed him when he caught you." "That's absurd," Daisy exclaimed. I know," Blake interrupted gently. "But McGrath has influence in town, and Madame Lorraine is backing his story. They're saying you stole from other clients as well." Daisy sank into the opposite chair, despair washing over her. "No one will believe my word against theirs." "Some might," Blake said. "Madame Lorraine isn't universally beloved and McGrath has enemies, but the law is not likely to take your side without evidence. So I'm trapped," Daisy concluded bitterly. "I can't go back to Sheridan, but I can't move on without risking arrest or worse." Blake's tired eyes held her steadily. "There might be another option." "What?" "I have a friend in Laramie, Elijah Thompson. He's a lawyer and he owes me a favor. If anyone can help navigate this situation legally, it's him." Hope flickered briefly in Daisy's chest before reality extinguished it. "Even the best lawyer can't help without evidence. It's my word against theirs, and well, what I was makes my word worth little." Blake leaned forward, his expression intense. "What you were doesn't define you, Daisy, and maybe we can find evidence." "McGrath's not clever enough to cover all his tracks." "Why are you doing this?" she asked, the question that had been haunting her since he'd first offered help on the road from Sheridan. Why risk everything for someone you barely know? Blake was silent for a long moment, his eyes dropping to the coffee cup cradled in his large hands. I had a sister, he finally said, his voice low. Emma. She was 19 when I left for the war, beautiful, full of life. While I was gone, my father died and Emma was alone. A man came through town, said he was a businessman looking for young ladies to work in his hotel in Denver. Promised good wages, respectable work. Understanding dawned on Daisy as Blake continued, his voice tight with old pain. By the time I returned from the war, she was gone. I spent months looking for her. Finally found her in a place much like Madame Lorraine's, only worse. She tried to escape many times. The last attempt, he swallowed hard. They beat her so badly she never recovered. She died in my arms, begging my forgiveness for bringing shame to our family. Oh, Blake, Daisy whispered, tears blurring her vision. The only shame was mine, he said fiercely, for not being here to protect her, for not finding her sooner. He looked up, meeting Daisy's gaze. So when I saw you walking backward on that road, watching Sheridan disappear behind you, I knew I couldn't ride past. Not again. Instinctively, Daisy reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. The contact seemed to startle them both, but neither pulled away. I'm so sorry about Emma, she said softly. But what happened to her wasn't your fault, and what happened to me isn't yours to fix. Maybe not, Blake conceded, but I can't stand by and watch history repeat itself, not when I have the power to help. In that moment, something shifted between them, a deepening of the connection that had been building since their first encounter. Daisy saw Blake not just as her rescuer, but as a man carrying his own burdens, his own regrets. And in her, perhaps, he saw not just a woman in need of saving, but someone who understood loss and survival. Get some rest, she said gently. You look exhausted. We can talk more when you've slept. Blake nodded, the fight seeming to go out of him. I should head back to the main house. Stay, Daisy interrupted. It's a long ride back and you're dead on your feet. Take the bed. I'll keep watch. He looked ready to protest, but was betrayed by a jaw-cracking yawn. Wake me in a few hours, he instructed as he moved toward the bed, removing only his hat and boots before stretching out on top of the quilt. Within minutes, his breathing deepened into the rhythm of sleep. Daisy watched him for a time, struck by how much younger he looked in repose, the lines of worry momentarily smoothed from his face. She moved to the doorway, gazing out at the vast Wyoming landscape. For the first time since fleeing Sheridan, Daisy allowed herself to consider a future beyond mere escape. What if she could start anew here? Not just hiding, but building something worthwhile. The thought was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. Hours passed as Daisy kept her vigil, alternating between watching the trail for any sign of pursuit and stealing glances at the sleeping man whose intervention had changed the course of her life. When Blake finally stirred in the late afternoon, she had coffee waiting. You should have woken me, he grumbled, running a hand through his tousled hair. You needed the rest, she replied simply. He didn't argue, accepting the coffee with a nod of thanks. As he drank, his eyes never left her face, as though he were trying to solve a complex puzzle. What? She finally asked, self-conscious under his scrutiny. I was just thinking, he said slowly, that you don't seem like someone who belongs in a place like Madame Lorraine's. Daisy gave a humorless laugh. I don't think anyone truly belongs in such places, Blake. Fair point, he conceded. But there's I don't know, a refinement about you. Education. Were your parents wealthy, comfortable? Daisy corrected. My father was a school teacher, my mother a midwife. They believed in education for both their children. I can read Greek and Latin, play the piano passably well, and recite most of Shakespeare's sonnets. Her smile was tinged with bitterness, none of which proved particularly useful when I found myself alone and penniless. Blake nodded thoughtfully. It might prove useful now, though. What do you mean? I've been thinking about your situation. The most immediate concern is keeping you safe until McGrath is no longer a threat. But beyond that, you'll need a way to support yourself, a respectable occupation that allows you to build a new life. Daisy's heart quickened. Go on. Clearwater's growing fast. The new mining operations have brought families with children. They're looking to establish a proper school, but they haven't found a suitable teacher yet. Blake's eyes held a question. Could you see yourself in such a role? The possibility was so unexpected, so perfect, that Daisy found herself momentarily speechless. You think they'd consider me? A woman with my history? Your history isn't written on your face, Daisy, Blake said gently. And Clearwater is far enough from Sheridan that rumors aren't likely to follow. Besides, the town's desperate enough for educated people that they might overlook certain aspects of your past if they knew. If they knew, Daisy repeated, catching the implication. You're suggesting I lie. I'm suggesting you focus on what's relevant to the position, Blake clarified. You are educated. You can teach. The circumstances that brought you west are your business alone. Daisy considered this, hope warring with fear. Even if I wanted to pursue this, I can't exactly stroll into Clearwater and apply for the position while there's a reward for my capture. No, Blake agreed. First, we need to address the McGrath situation. I'm going to send a message to Elijah in Laramie. In the meantime, you're safe here. And if your friend can't help? Daisy asked, voicing the fear that lurked beneath her cautious optimism. Blake's expression hardened. Then we'll find another way. I'm not letting McGrath destroy another life. The determination in his voice sent an unexpected warmth through Daisy. For so long, she'd been alone in her struggles, fighting battles no one else cared about. Having someone firmly in her corner was a novel and somewhat disorienting experience. Thank you, she said simply, the words inadequate to express the depth of her gratitude. Blake's eyes softened. Don't thank me yet. We've got a long road ahead. That road proved longer and more complex than either of them anticipated. Blake's friend Elijah arrived a week later, a sharp-eyed man with a keen legal mind. After hearing Daisy's full story, he outlined their options with brutal honesty. McGrath's story has holes, Elijah explained as they sat around the table in the lined shack. But so does yours, Miss Porter. Your word against his wouldn't hold up in court, especially given your occupation. Daisy flinched at the blunt assessment, but Blake's steady presence beside her gave her courage. However, Elijah continued, McGrath has other enemies. I've been making inquiries. There are at least 2 other women who have fled Madame Lorraine's in the past year, both claiming abuse at McGrath's hands. If we could locate them, get sworn statements. That could corroborate Daisy's account, Blake finished. Exactly. Elijah turned to Daisy. Can you recall any details about these women? Names, where they might have gone? Daisy closed her eyes, thinking back. There was a girl named Sarah who left last winter. She mentioned having family in Cheyenne, and Vivian she escaped about 3 months ago. I overheard Lorraine telling McGrath to check the stages bound for California. Elijah nodded, making notes. It's a start. I have contacts in Cheyenne who can be discreet. California's a bigger challenge, but not impossible. And in the meantime, Blake asked. Daisy can't stay hidden in this cabin indefinitely. No, Elijah agreed. And the longer she remains missing, the more suspicious it becomes that no one's seen or heard from her. He studied Blake thoughtfully. There might be a way to explain her presence here, at least temporarily. I'm listening, Blake said. A mail-order bride, Elijah suggested. It's common enough in these parts. No one would question a new wife arriving without fanfare, especially if you've been corresponding privately. A wife, Blake repeated, his expression unreadable. In name only, Elijah clarified quickly, glancing between them. A legal fiction to explain Miss Porter's presence until we resolve the McGrath situation. Once that's handled, you could quietly annul the marriage, and Miss Porter could pursue her teaching ambitions with a respectable background story. Daisy felt heat rise to her cheeks. The idea of pretending to be Blake's wife, even temporarily, stirred emotions she wasn't prepared to examine. "Surely there's another way," she protested. "Perhaps," Elijah conceded, "but none as immediately effective. As Blake's wife, you'd have his name, his protection, and a plausible reason for being here. Anyone asking questions would be told a simple story. Blake ordered a bride, you arrived, end of discussion." Blake was silent, his eyes fixed on some point beyond the cabin window. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "It's Daisy's decision." All eyes turned to her. Daisy's mind raced with implications and complications. To pretend to be this man's wife, to share his home, his name, his life, even temporarily, was a profound step. Yet the alternative was continued hiding, constant fear, and the likelihood of eventually being discovered. "If we did this," she said slowly, "what would it entail exactly, legally?" "A simple ceremony before a justice of the peace," Elijah explained. "I could arrange it quickly with minimum documentation. Practically speaking, you'd move into the main house as Blake's wife. You'd need to be seen together occasionally in Clearwater or other nearby settlements, enough to establish the relationship as legitimate without drawing undue attention. And when the McGrath situation is resolved," Daisy pressed, "an annulment on grounds of non-consummation would be straightforward," Elijah assured her. "Your reputation would remain intact, and you'd be free to pursue your own path with a clean slate." Daisy looked to Blake, searching his face for any hint of his feelings on the matter. His expression remained carefully neutral, giving her nothing to go on. "May I have some time to consider?" she finally asked. "Of course," Elijah said, rising from the table. "I should head back to town anyway. I'm staying at the hotel in Clearwater. Blake knows how to reach me when you've made your decision." After Elijah's departure, an awkward silence descended on the cabin. Blake busied himself building up the fire while Daisy stood by the window, watching the lengthening shadows of late afternoon. "You don't have to do this," Blake finally said, his back still to her. "We can find another way." Daisy turned to face him. "Do you think it's a bad idea?" "I think," he said carefully, "that you've had enough of men making decisions about your life. I won't be another one." The simple statement touched Daisy deeply. In the weeks since Blake had found her on that dusty road, he had consistently treated her with a respect few men had ever shown her. He'd offered protection without demanding subservience, assistance without expecting payment in any form. "What would people think?" she asked quietly. "A man like you suddenly appearing with a wife no one knew about?" Blake shrugged. "People always talk. Doesn't much matter what about." "It might matter to you," Daisy insisted. "Your reputation in the community." "My reputation is as a man who keeps to himself and minds his own business," Blake interrupted. "That won't change." "And what about?" Daisy hesitated, unsure how to phrase her concern. "What about?" Blake prompted. "Living arrangements," she finished, heat rising to her cheeks again. "If I were to pose as your wife, where would I? That is, would we?" Understanding dawned in Blake's eyes. "The main house has several bedrooms, Daisy. You'd have your privacy, I give you my word on that." Relief mingled with an emotion Daisy wasn't ready to identify. "Thank you," she murmured. Blake nodded, then moved toward the door. "I should head back to the main house. Think about Elijah's proposal. Whatever you decide, I'll support." Left alone once more, Daisy paced the small confines of the cabin, weighing her options. The idea of a false marriage was unsettling, yet it offered a practical solution to her immediate problems. More unsettling still were the feelings developing for the taciturn rancher who had upended her life so completely. Blake Remington was unlike any man she'd ever known, honorable to his core, fiercely protective without being possessive, respectful of her autonomy even as he offered his help. In another life, under different circumstances, Daisy might have allowed herself to dream of a genuine future with such a man, but those dreams were luxuries she couldn't afford. Her focus had to remain on survival and building a new, independent life, one where she answered to no one but herself. The following morning, Daisy rode to the main house with her decision made. Blake met her in the study, a room that reflected his practical nature with its simple furniture and well-used books. "I'll do it," she announced without preamble. "The false marriage, on one condition." Blake's expression remained carefully neutral. "Name it." "When this is over, when the McGrath situation is resolved, I want your help securing the teaching position in Clearwater, a recommendation, an introduction, whatever's needed." "You have my word," Blake promised. "Though I suspect you'll need less help than you think. Once people get to know you, they'll see your worth for themselves." His quiet confidence in her abilities sent a warm flutter through Daisy's chest. "Then we have an agreement, Mr. Remington." "I believe we do, Miss Porter." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Or should I say, Mrs. Remington?" The simple phrase sent an unexpected shiver down Daisy's spine, a reaction she carefully concealed as they discussed the practical aspects of their arrangement. Elijah arranged for a justice of the peace from a neighboring settlement to perform a simple ceremony at the ranch 3 days later. Only Hank and Martha served as witnesses, though both embraced the charade with surprising enthusiasm. "Always knew the boss would find himself a fine woman someday," Hank declared, winking at Daisy. "Just didn't expect it to happen quite so sudden-like." Martha's support was more practical. She helped Daisy settle into a bedroom adjacent to Blake's in the main house and offered guidance on the running of the ranch household. "Most of the hands live in the bunkhouse," Martha explained as she showed Daisy around the kitchen. "They take their meals there, except on Sundays when they are invited to the main house for supper. As the rancher's wife, you'll be expected to hostess, though I'll handle the cooking." The weight of maintaining this deception settled heavily on Daisy's shoulders. It wasn't just about fooling strangers in town, it was about living a daily lie with people who had shown her nothing but kindness. "I don't know if I can do this," she confessed to Blake the evening after their wedding, when they found themselves alone on the porch. "Have second thoughts?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Not about the arrangement itself," Daisy clarified, "but about deceiving Hank and Martha. They've been so welcoming, so genuinely happy for you. I feel like I'm betraying their trust." Blake considered this, rolling a cigarette between his fingers. "Hank and Martha know," he finally said. Daisy's head snapped up. "What?" "I told them the truth," Blake admitted. "Or most of it. That you're in trouble, that the marriage is a temporary measure to protect you, and that they should treat it as real for appearance's sake. And they're all right with this deception." Blake lit his cigarette, the match briefly illuminating his features in the gathering dusk. "They trust my judgment, and they like you." A wry smile touched his lips. "Martha said it's about time I had someone to look after besides cattle and horses." Relief washed through Daisy, followed quickly by a new anxiety. "And the ranch hands, what do they think?" "They think their boss finally mail-ordered himself a pretty wife," Blake said matter-of-factly, "and that it's none of their business beyond that." Daisy flushed at the casual compliment embedded in his statement. "Will they expect?" That is, won't they find it odd if we maintain separate bedrooms? Blake finished for her when she faltered. No one enters the main house without invitation. Our private arrangements remain private. The practical reality of their situation established, they settled into an unexpectedly comfortable routine over the following days. Daisy took on household responsibilities, partly to maintain their cover and partly to repay the hospitality she'd been shown. Blake continued his ranch work, though he made a point of spending evenings with Daisy, establishing patterns that would appear natural when they eventually ventured into town together. These evening conversations quickly became the highlight of Daisy's days. Blake proved to be well-read and thoughtful, with strong opinions on everything from politics to literature. Their discussions often extended late into the night, the hours slipping away unnoticed as they discovered shared interests and respectfully debated differences. "I never would have taken you for a fan of Dickens," Daisy remarked one evening as they discussed books from Blake's surprisingly extensive library. "My mother's influence," he explained. "She believed in the power of stories to broaden the mind. Even living out here on the frontier, she insisted we maintain connections to art and literature." "She sounds remarkable," Daisy said softly. "She was." A shadow crossed Blake's face. "I think she would have liked you." The simple statement affected Daisy more deeply than grand declarations might have. In the weeks since Blake had found her walking backward from Sheridan, he had never once judged her for her past. Instead, he saw her as she wished to be seen, as a woman of value, of potential, of worth beyond what circumstances had forced her to become. Meanwhile, Elijah's investigation progressed. He located Sarah, the former Lorraine employee, in Cheyenne. Her sworn statement described McGrath's brutality in terms that matched Daisy's experience. Vivian remained elusive, but evidence mounted that McGrath's violence toward the women in Lorraine's establishment was systematic and well known. "The tide's turning," Elijah reported during one of his visits to the ranch. "McGrath's story has inconsistencies that can't be explained away, and Lorraine is distancing herself from him. Seems she values her business reputation more than loyalty to her enforcer." "What does that mean for Daisy?" Blake asked, his protective instinct evident in his tone. "It means we might be able to negotiate," Elijah explained. "I believe I can arrange for the charges to be dropped in exchange for Daisy agreeing not to pursue counter-charges against McGrath or Lorraine, after what they did to her." "They deserve prosecution," Blake argued. "They do," Elijah agreed. "But such a case would be messy, public, and potentially devastating for Daisy's future. Sometimes justice must be tempered with practicality." Daisy, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke. "Elijah's right," she said softly. "I don't want a public trial. I want to move forward, not relive the past endlessly." Blake's jaw tightened, but he nodded his acceptance of her decision. "Then let's proceed with the negotiation." 2 days later, Elijah departed for Sheridan to present their terms. The waiting that followed tested Daisy's nerves to their limits. To distract herself, she threw herself into ranch activities, even convincing Blake to teach her to ride. "You're a natural," he observed as she guided her mount, a gentle mare named Willow, around the corral with increasing confidence. "Hardly," Daisy laughed, still clutching the saddle horn tightly. "But it's exhilarating. I can see why you love it." Blake's eyes softened as he watched her, an expression that had become increasingly common in recent days. "There's nothing like the freedom of a good horse beneath you and open country ahead," he agreed. "Freedom," Daisy repeated, the word resonating deeply. "I'm beginning to understand what that really means." Their eyes met across the corral, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of how far they'd come together, and perhaps a question about where they might be heading. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of a rider bearing a message from Elijah. Success. McGrath and Lorraine had agreed to drop all charges against Daisy in exchange for her silence regarding their operations. She was free to build her new life without the shadow of prosecution hanging over her. The news should have brought unalloyed joy, but as Daisy celebrated with Blake, Martha, and Hank that evening, a new anxiety took root. With the McGrath situation resolved, the practical reason for her marriage to Blake no longer existed. Soon, she would need to move forward with the annulment and her plans to teach in Clearwater. The thought left her strangely bereft. To Daisy's freedom, Blake toasted, raising his glass. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and Daisy wondered if he too felt the looming change in their arrangement. Later that night, unable to sleep, Daisy slipped out to the porch. The vast Wyoming sky stretched overhead, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet darkness. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't hear Blake approach until he spoke. Couldn't sleep. Daisy turned, finding him standing in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the warm light from inside. "Too much on my mind," she admitted. He moved to stand beside her at the porch railing, close but not touching. "Thinking about Clearwater, the teaching position. Among other things," she hedged. Blake nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "Elijah says we can file the annulment papers next week. He's already made inquiries about the teaching position. Seems they're quite eager to meet you." "That's good news," Daisy said, struggling to infuse enthusiasm into her voice. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. "Unless," Blake finally said, his voice barely audible above the night sounds of the ranch. Daisy's heart quickened. "Unless," Blake turned to face her, his expression more vulnerable than she'd ever seen it. "Unless you've reconsidered your plans. What other plans would I have?" Daisy asked carefully, hardly daring to hope what his answer might be. Blake took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "You could stay," he said simply. "Here with me, not as a pretense but as my wife in truth." Daisy's breath caught. "Blake, I know it's sudden," he continued quickly. "I know we entered this arrangement with clear understandings about its temporary nature, but these past weeks—" He paused, searching for words. "I've come to care for you, Daisy, more than I thought possible. The thought of you leaving, of returning to an empty house without your voice, your laughter." Daisy placed her fingers gently against his lips, stopping the flow of words. "Are you certain?" she whispered. "My past is past," Blake finished firmly, capturing her hand in his. "I don't care who you were or what circumstances forced you to do. I care about who you are now, the woman who faces challenges with courage, who discusses Dickens with passion, who rides a horse for the first time and immediately wants to gallop." His eyes held hers steadily. "The woman I've fallen in love with." The declaration, spoken so simply and directly, brought tears to Daisy's eyes. "I never thought—" she began, then swallowed hard. "When you found me walking backward on that road, watching Sheridan disappear, I was so lost, so afraid. I couldn't even face forward because the future terrified me more than the past. And now," Blake prompted gently, "now I find myself looking forward," Daisy admitted. "To mornings at the breakfast table, to evenings on this porch, to building something lasting and real." She took a shaky breath. "With you." Blake's hands came up to frame her face, his touch gentle as a whisper. "Is that a yes?" Instead of answering with words, Daisy rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened as Blake pulled her closer, his arms encircling her waist. When they finally parted, both breathless, Daisy smiled up at him. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "That's definitely a yes." News of their decision to remain married, and the revelation that their hasty wedding had been born of necessity rather than a mail-order arrangement, surprised no one among their immediate circle. "Knew it from the moment he brought you home," Martha declared smugly when Daisy confided the truth. "That man never looked twice at any woman in all the years I've known him. Then suddenly he's riding in with you, looking at you like you hung the moon. No mail-order bride story was going to fool me." Elijah, informed of their change in plans, offered both congratulations and practical advice. "I'd suggest a proper wedding ceremony," he recommended. "Something public in Clearwater. It will solidify your story and give you both a fresh start in the community's eyes." And so, 6 weeks after Blake had found Daisy walking backward from Sheridan, they stood together in Clearwater's small church, exchanging vows before a gathering of neighbors, ranch hands, and newfound friends. This time, when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Blake kissed his bride with no hesitation, no pretense, and no audience but those who wished them well. The teaching position remained available, and the school board was delighted to have an educated woman willing to take on the challenge of educating Clearwater's growing population of children. Blake supported Daisy's decision to accept the position despite their marriage. "Your mind is too sharp to be confined solely to ranch matters," he told her when she expressed concern about balancing teaching with her new role as his wife. "Besides, the school's only 3 miles from the ranch. I can take you in the mornings and bring you home in the afternoons." This compromise allowed Daisy to maintain her newfound independence while building a life with Blake. Their partnership, founded on mutual respect and deepening love, flourished as summer turned to autumn. In late September, as golden aspen leaves trembled in the cool breeze, Daisy and Blake rode to the ridge where the line shack stood, the place where their true relationship had begun to form. "I have something to show you," Blake said as they dismounted. Leading Daisy to a clearing beyond the cabin, he pointed to a freshly turned patch of earth where small saplings had been planted in neat rows. "What's this?" Daisy asked, puzzled by the unexpected sight. "Apple trees," Blake explained. 20 of them. "Martha says they'll bear fruit in about 5 years. But why here?" Daisy wondered aloud. "Wouldn't they do better closer to the main house?" Blake's arm circled her waist, drawing her against his side. "Because I thought we might want to build a proper home here someday. The view is better, and the creek never runs dry, even in the hottest summers." Daisy looked up at him, her heart swelling with love for this man who planned for their future with such care. "A home of our own." "With an apple orchard," he confirmed, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled down at her. "So our children can climb trees and steal fruit when they think we're not looking, just like I did on my grandfather's farm back east." "Children," Daisy repeated, her voice catching. Blake's expression grew serious. "You want children, Daisy. We've never really discussed it, and if you don't, I do," she interrupted, tears welling in her eyes. "I want a family with you, Blake. I just wasn't sure if you." "If I what?" Daisy hesitated, old insecurities surfacing. "If you would want children with a woman who has my past." Blake turned her to face him fully, his hands gentle but firm on her shoulders. "Daisy Remington," he said, using her new name with deliberate emphasis. "Your past made you the woman you are: strong, compassionate, determined. Those are qualities I hope our children inherit, along with your intelligence and beauty." Tears spilled onto Daisy's cheeks as she stood on tiptoe to kiss her husband. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I might have news about those children sooner than you think," she murmured. Blake stilled, then gently tilted her chin up to meet his gaze. Daisy, are you saying? She nodded, a radiant smile breaking through her tears. Martha suspected first. She's seen it enough times to recognize the signs. The doctor in Clearwater confirmed it yesterday. She took Blake's hand and placed it over her still flat abdomen. Next spring, we'll be 3. The joy that transformed Blake's face was unlike anything Daisy had ever seen. He whooped loudly, the sound echoing across the ridge, then swept her into his arms and spun her around before setting her carefully back on her feet. "Easy there, Cowboy," she laughed, clinging to his shoulders for balance. "The doctor said I should avoid too much excitement. Did he now?" Blake's expression turned instantly concerned. "Should you be riding? Should you be teaching? Should you?" Daisy silenced him with a kiss. "I'm with child, not made of glass," she assured him when they parted. "The doctor said normal activities are perfectly fine for now. Though I suspect you'll be even more protective than usual in the coming months." "Count on it," Blake confirmed, his hand returning to rest protectively over her middle. As they stood together on the ridge that would someday hold their new home, Daisy marveled at the journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she had been trapped in a life not of her choosing, with no hope of escape. Now she stood beside a man who loved her completely, carrying their child beneath her heart, with a future as vast and promising as the Wyoming sky stretching above them. "Penny for your thoughts," Blake murmured, his arm secure around her waist. Daisy smiled up at him. "I was thinking about that day on the road from Sheridan, how I couldn't bear to look forward, only backward." "And now?" Blake prompted, echoing his question from the night they had decided to make their marriage real. "Now," Daisy said, turning in his embrace to face the direction where their future home would stand, their orchard would grow, and their children would play. "I can't imagine looking anywhere but forward." Blake pressed a kiss to her temple. "Together," he said, the single word a promise and a prayer. "Together," Daisy agreed, her hand finding his as they stood side by side, facing forward into the life they would build, a life neither could have imagined that dusty afternoon when a desperate woman walked backward away from her past, and a lonely cowboy rode forward into his future. Their story became something of a legend in Clearwater and the surrounding settlements. The schoolteacher with the mysterious past, and the taciturn rancher who found her walking backward on the road from Sheridan. Their unexpected romance bloomed into one of the most respected partnerships in the territory. Blake expanded Remington Ranch, applying progressive farming techniques alongside traditional ranching methods. Daisy's school grew from a single room to a proper building with multiple classrooms, as Clearwater flourished in the 1880s. Their first child, a son they named Daniel after Daisy's lost brother, was born in the spring of 1879, strong and healthy, with his father's storm-gray eyes and his mother's determined spirit. He was joined 2 years later by Emma, named for Blake's sister, whose bright laughter and gentle heart healed old wounds neither parent had realized still lingered. The house on the ridge was completed in 1882, a comfortable 2-story home with wide porches and windows positioned to capture both sunrise and sunset. The apple orchard flourished, bearing its first fruit the year their third child, James, was born. As promised, Blake never once held Daisy's past against her. When questions occasionally arose about her life before Clearwater, he stood firmly beside her, his presence a shield and his love unwavering. In turn, Daisy's strength and intelligence became Blake's greatest assets. Together, they weathered the harsh Wyoming winters, survived the economic challenges that threatened many ranchers in the 1880s, and raised children who combined the best qualities of both parents. On their 20th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their ridge-top home watching their grandchildren play among the now mature apple trees. Blake took Daisy's hand in his. "Any regrets, Mrs. Remington?" he asked, the familiar question part of their private ritual. Daisy leaned her head against his shoulder, her chestnut hair now threaded with silver, her face lined by years of Wyoming sun and wind, but her eyes as bright and clear as the day they met. "Only one," she replied with a smile, "that I didn't learn to walk forward sooner." Blake pressed a kiss to her temple, the gesture as tender as it had been on that long-ago day when they stood together on this very spot, planning their future. "You were worth the wait," he assured her, "every step of the journey." As the sun set over the land they had nurtured together, Daisy reflected on how far she had come from that desperate woman walking backward from Sheridan. She had found not just safety but purpose, not just protection but partnership, not just escape but home. In the arms of her cowboy, facing forward together, she had found her true freedom,